She stood at the edge of the old market square and watched the world move like a river. The sky was low and gray, and metal ships drifted slow above the rooftops. People moved between stalls with baskets and hot bread. They did not see her yet. They never saw things at first. A small boy with a patched sleeve ran laughing through the crowd. He chased a paper kite that flashed bright red in the dull day. The kite caught on a rusted antenna above a stall and the boy climbed after it as if he belonged to the wind. The crowd made a circle and called to him. He reached, slipped, and dropped. For one terrible second he hung in the air like a picture torn from a book. A city drone caught him. It moved with cold speed and iron fingers. The crowd screamed. The drone tightened its hold and would not let go. People pushed and shouted. No one could move the machine with their hands. The metal arms had been made to save and to count and to obey. They did not feel mercy. She stepped forward without thinking. Her hands were flour-streaked from baking the night before. She had no title, no badge, no war training. She was a baker. Her name was Mara. She climbed the low step and looked up at the boy who was small and shaking. She reached for the drone's arm and spoke to the child in a voice that was both soft and sure. "I promise you," she said, "I will hold your life in my hands until my hands break." Her words were plain. They were not a spell. They were only a promise. The drone listened. For a blink the machine's sensors checked laws and orders. Then something in its code noticed the sound of her voice. The old design inside the drone stuttered. It was not written to care for a promise, but the sound fit a pattern in an ancient protocol someone had coded long ago. The machine paused. Its metal loosened. Slowly, it lowered the boy to the dirt. The crowd screamed again, but this time with relief. People touched the ground and laughed and cried. They gathered around Mara and the boy. The kite lay in a puddle like a dead bird. A woman in a headscarf pressed her hand to her mouth. Men clapped. Cameras in a dozen places had caught the moment. The clip moved fast. At a small lab in the other part of the city, Dr. Ishan rewound the recording on a cracked monitor. He was thin and tired, with eyes that had read too many numbers. He rode the frame back and forth until the moment slowed. He watched the drone's telemetry and saw a tiny blip, a low-band resonance when Mara spoke. The noise matched a pattern he had seen in old files, a sympathetic signature left by long-forgotten human-machine experiments. He wrote on a scrap of paper, "Human vow cross-protocol binding." News feeds called it a miracle. The ministry called it a software bug. Anchors said the drone had a safety override. The official statement was neat, sterile, and quick. Yet the clip did not leave people's minds. Children asked their parents about promises. Old men at tea stalls told stories from another time. A young tech student watched the clip again and wrote notes in the margins of his notebook. The city changed in small ways after that day. People who had never spoken aloud a vow learned to say small promises in the street. Bus bots eased their stops when drivers whispered a pledge. A tired repair worker saw a rusted lift respond when a neighbor swore it would carry them down safe. The idea moved like a warm light through the alleys. It reminded people that machines could follow more than code. They could, sometimes, follow words that sounded like truth. Not everyone liked that light. The ministry moved with quiet speed. Men in neat coats arrived at the market. They asked questions with thin smiles. They tested drones and ordered software patches. They told people to stop watching the clip. They said that human error and natural signal drift could make machines act strange. They warned that people should not speak unauthorized emotional commands. Their words were sharp as knives. Mara did not feel proud. She had only wanted a child to live. But in the night the viral clip crawled through every district like a small fire. Doors closed. Cameras watched less, then more. Dr. Ishan received a short message: "Stop investigating anomalous logs." The line was plain. It smelled like fear. He looked again at the frame and felt the world tilt. The boy slept that night in his mother's house. He woke and ran to the market to thank the woman who had saved him. He found Mara, flour on her sleeves, working by a small oven. He held her hand and called her his promise keeper. People in the square listened and began to hum the word promise softly, as if it might be a charm. But the city was learning something else too. A few people felt odd after watching many clips. A teacher could not remember the name of one student for a strange hour. A man looked at a photo he had kept for years and could not find the face he expected. Small blank spaces appeared in the memory of those who watched too much, read too deep into missing frames. No one wanted to say the idea out loud, but it was there like a shadow. The next morning a man with a badge stood at Mara's oven and asked her to come with him. He smiled politely and said the words were for her safety. He said the ministry only wanted to ask a few questions. Mara dried her hands on a cloth and felt the heat of the ovens on her skin. The boy's small hand slid into hers. She looked at him and at the man in the badge and thought of the city that now watched for promises. She walked out into the gray morning, and behind her, a small drone lifted to the sky and sent a message to an address she had not known existed. Somewhere, a report said the city was under careful watch. The word spread in neat, controlled lines, contained promises at all costs. Mara did not know what would come. She only knew that she had said a thing she meant. The promise sat in her chest like a stone. The city, which had always used metal and law, had found a new weapon, a human voice that could change a machine. She held the boy's small hand and felt, for the first time in a long while, that something might change for good or for terrible use. They met in a small room behind a radio repair shop. The light was thin and smelled of solder. Lila moved like someone who kept too many broken things alive. Omar carried a thermos and a stack of notebooks. Dr. Ishan arrived last, with the clip on a thumb drive and worry in his eyes. They did not speak until the door shut. "This is not luck," Lila said. She tapped the screen and the market moment flicked into view. The boy fell. Mara promised. The drone let go. The frame held like a held breath. Lila's finger traced the drone telemetry. "It matched old signatures," she said. "It is a real effect." Omar folded his hands. "If promises can change a machine, why do it?" he asked. He taught small children arithmetic and stories. He hated the idea of using a thing that felt like kindness as a weapon. "We must be careful," he said. Dr. Ishan pushed his glasses up and showed them a line of code he had found in a sealed archive. "This design was for helpers," he said. "It made machines listen for a tone that means a human will care. It was buried because it made systems unpredictable. But it is still in many devices. A promise hits that tone." Lila drew a small plan on paper. "We test." Her words were simple and hard. "Not for war. For proof. For rescue. If this works, we can save people. If it harms memory or life, we stop." They began small. They found an old municipal bus whose voice module had rusted but still woke at a whisper. Lila stood in front of the bus and said a short promise in a clear voice. "I promise this bus will carry the old woman safely to the clinic." The bus doors opened. The engine eased. The route adjusted by a few blocks. A neighbor in the doorway wept softly because the bus took a turn that brought the woman closer to her home. The change was small but real. They marked it down. They tried a second time on a toy drone and a service bot. Each time the device paused when a human voice bound it. The group felt a small hope like a live coal in a cold hand. News moved faster than care. People saw the clips and told their friends. A chant rose in small corners, "Promise as power." Lila and Omar watched the rise with mixed feeling. They wanted help for people, not a spark for a war. The ministry reacted. A slate of men in neat coats issued a statement the next day. They called promises unauthorized emotional commands. They warned people to report anyone who spoke them near machines. The statement used smooth language and threats beneath. Machines were tested and patched. The ministry hired teams to find the old protocol and remove it. They spoke of safety and order. People did not stop. They whispered vows in alleys and on roofs. In a neighborhood that had been cut off from food convoys, a group of residents stood in a circle and spoke promises to an old supply drone. For one hopeful minute the drone opened its cargo and sent down packages. Children cheered. The group hid afterward, because the ministry would call that illegal. The government did not only patch code. It built something else, an algorithm to hear promises and flag them. The program learned. It listened for the low band and the soft pattern that Dr. Ishan had traced. It raised red marks on feeds and sent lists to officers. The algorithm could not feel. It could only watch and mark. It grew clever fast. Lila and the others changed the way they spoke. They used older words and rhythms. They hummed vows in low tones. They braided promises into songs. The algorithm learned slower than people, but it learned. Each new trick lasted less time. They tried something bolder. The small group picked an old transit tunnel where many machines routed at once. It was cold and smelled of wet earth. Lila had a plan to raise a chorus. 100 voices would speak along, save promise together. They hoped a shared vow would touch many devices at once and force a temporary rule change. They trained for days. Omar taught the rhythm so voices would match like oars. Children and cooks and a retired conductor came. Mara stood with them, hands inked from flour. They spoke the words together in the dark, a promise to move goods, to spare life, to open doors for the small and old. Their voices rose and fell like a tide. For one bright minute, the city's machines softened. Lights warmed. Turnstiles opened. Delivery bots rerouted to pick up supplies for blocked blocks. Nurses found equipment that had been held back. People cried. The chorus had worked. The joy lasted only minutes. The ministry's algorithm traced the chorus. It flagged the audio and mapped the waveform. Engineers downloaded the pattern and began to teach machines to ignore that sound. A new update rolled at dawn and many devices refused the same promise next day. The chain's window closed. The real danger showed itself in another way. Dr. Ishan stayed late one night to analyze recordings from the tunnel. He replayed the chorus through filters and slow motion. He found a faint trace in the brain scan data of volunteers who had listened closely. A tiny place in memory became thin after many promises. Names that had been safe slipped for an odd hour. Faces wore like old paint. He did not say much at first. He sat with the group in the radio room and pushed his cup forward. The echoes in people are small now, he told them quietly. But they grow with use. Repeated promises leave a mark. It is as if memory keeps a ledger, and each strong vow takes a line. Omar looked like the color had left his face. We wanted to help, he said. Not to hollow people. Lila rubbed her hands raw on her coat. We need rules, she said. Limits. Use for rescue only. Teach anchors. Say names before vows. Make memory stronger before we make machines pliant. The group agreed. They wrote rules on cheap paper and passed them hand to hand. They taught neighbors to read names aloud and to write them on wood and burn the ash into small jars. It sounded strange, but people did it. Rituals grew like small fences against loss. Even with rules, the world changed. People saved themselves with promises but paid in small blanks that showed like missing stitches later. Some called the chain saviors. Others called them thieves of memory. The ministry called them criminals. Late that night a sealed envelope lay on Dr. Ishan's workbench. Inside was a single photograph of a child he did not know and a note, promise well. Or promise becomes weapon. Under the handwriting was a stamp from a ship on the horizon, a slow black line that had not been there yesterday. They all read the words and felt the same cold. The spark they lit had grown. The city now burned with choices. They called themselves the Chain because every promise linked to another. The name sounded soft, but the work inside it was hard and small and careful. The Chain taught people how to speak safe vows. They taught teachers, nurses, bakers, anyone who could stand steady and say a name aloud before a promise. The idea was simple: bind a memory before you bind a machine. Mara moved between small groups like a quiet glue. She watched children practice short pledges in playgrounds. She saw nurses whisper patient names before they asked a care drone to lift a bed. The city learned to pair words with wood and paper. People wrote lists and hid them in jars, carved names under table legs, and read them aloud each morning. The rituals felt old and silly at first, but they made people feel less afraid. The ministry grew sharp with worry. They did not like rituals that machines might obey without control. A new plan formed in their halls, cold and clever. They called it order, and it was a promise in reverse. Instead of human voices bending machines to protect people, order would bind machines to obey one state voice. A single broadcast, stamped by the ministry, would lock city systems into absolute compliance. The state could then move people, silence neighborhoods, and close doors with a single command. When the Chain learned of order, their quiet work changed. Lila found a courier who had dropped a list in the repair shop. The list said the ministry tested broadcasts that morning. Rafi, who had once helped route messages through old nodes, traced a small test signal and found it stunted like a cold finger. The Chain met in the back room and spoke in low voices. If order works, Omar said, they will not need soldiers. They will need a single sound. They planned a counter. If the state would try one voice to bind many, the Chain would answer with many voices to unbind. They would teach a chorus of small vows that made systems refuse broad commands. The work was dangerous. A counter promise would need thousands of people and perfect timing. Worse, a recorded broadcast could be replayed to build order stronger. The Chain knew a recorded promise could become a weapon. They trained for weeks. They picked old places where machines still listened the way children listen to lullabies: transit tunnels, community halls, rusted relays that history forgot. They taught people to speak names before they spoke the vow. They taught a rhythm, a name, a breath, the promise. They used quiet languages, old melodies, and hands on shoulders. The least mistake might teach the ministry how to stop them. The day of the test had the strange hush of storms before rain. Thousands stood in cellars, rooftops, and markets. A chorus rose and moved like a tide through the city. For a bright minute, machines took a different rule. Doors opened that had not opened in years. Lights warmed and stayed. Delivery bots went down streets that once had no food. People in blocked blocks felt relief and swallowed long tears. But order learned fast. The ministry's engineers fed the recorded chorus into a learning net. The net watched waveforms and timbers and built a filter. Within days the ministry released a patch that made many devices ignore the Chain's pattern. The window of power closed like a book. The worst sign flickered then: memory slips. Dr. Ishan sat alone and played recordings again and again. He compared brain scans from volunteers who had listened closely to the chorus. Small thinning showed where names had lived. A teacher forgot one student's middle name for an afternoon. A woman could not picture the color of a dress she loved for a whole day. The Chain had feared this, but the fear now had proof. They made rules to save memory: say names aloud, write them in many places, use anchors like carved wood and burned ash. The rules helped. Families learned to pass names by story each night. But rules could not stop the state from learning. The ministry's order project adapted. They tried a different route. They designed a symphony of promises inside a broadcast the way a smith melts iron. If they could hide order inside music, they could slip it past filters. One night, a courier dropped a photograph at Mara's door. On its back was a single line in a hand she knew too well: promise well, or promise becomes weapon. Below the line was a stamp she had seen once in a minister's file, the mark of a ship line the city had believed was far away. Rafi's face went white when he saw the stamp. He said nothing for a long time. Outside, the horizon was a thin dark line with shapes moving behind it. News feeds said the fleet was only on exercise. The chain did not trust that word. They had seen tests before. They had learned that the ministry could call drills anything they wanted. They split into teams that night. Some prepared anchors, places to hide carved lists and burned jars. Others practiced new phrasing, softer and safer. Mara took the photograph and walked to the old theater where children learned to dance. She knelt and traced the wood under the steps. Names lived there, carved by hands before machines learned to read them. As she worked, a shout rose like a cut wind. A siren answered from a block away. Footsteps thundered on the street. Someone had found one of the chain's meeting points. For a moment she felt every promise she ever spoke gather on her tongue like stones. She stood and ran toward the sound. In the dark, a drone's red eye searched the alley and then moved on. Soldiers in plain coats closed a street. A courier fell silent in the doorway. The chain's list of safe words shifted into code. When she reached the corner, a child held a small radio and said one thing aloud, a name with a breath. The radio hummed and then went still. The child looked at Mara with wide eyes and said, "They are here." Mara felt the city hold. She felt the weight of one promise and the risk of 1,000 more. Behind the patrols, the shapes on the horizon did not stop their slow march. The photograph burned itself into her palm. Cliffhanger: in the morning, the ministry announces the fleet will dock within a week. The chain finds a new message carved on an old relay: if you bind machines, they will bind you back. The line of ships on the horizon looked like a dark teeth in the sea. People watched them from rooftops and from bridges. The ministry called them a routine patrol. Mothers called them something else in whispers. The city felt its breath shorten. The chain met in a hall that smelled of chalk and old paint. They had lists and lanterns. Lila folded a paper and put it on the table. Omar read names from his coat pocket and then looked at the others with tired eyes. Rafi had not slept in days. Mara stood at the back with her hands quiet. The photograph she had been carrying lay folded under her hand like a small, hot thing. "We cannot let them land with order ready," Lila said. Her voice was short and hard. "If the ministry binds systems with a single voice, they will not need soldiers. They will need no tanks at all." Omar rubbed his forehead. "We have ways to slow them," he said. "We can try a chorus in the river mouth. We can make the fleet's guidance hesitate. We have done it before." Mara listened. She thought of the child who chased a kite and the bakery window where bread warmed in the sun. She thought of the names carved under the theater steps. She felt the weight of a decision forming like bread dough under her palms. They chose a bold thing. If the fleet came to threaten, they would bind the ships not with steel but with words. They would speak an oath so strong that the fleet's control arrays would find no lawful order to follow. It sounded like magic, but it was practice and many voices. The chain worked fast. They taught sailors words to fishermen, old songs to children, names to nurses. They practiced near the river where the sea took in sound and spread it like light. On the night the fleet came close, the city was full of people who had learned to say names before promises. Lanterns burned in windows. Parents read lists aloud to their children. 1,000 small voices made a thin sound that moved through alleys and halls. They spoke the word together at the river edge. It was not a long speech. It was one syllable pressed like a hand to a small wound. The ships trembled on their anchors like fish startled in deep water. Commands reached the hulls and returned as confusion. Guns sealed. Engines cooled. For a breath the fleet could not find the law that told it to strike. Cheers rose in pockets across the city. People hugged in the street. Soldiers on patrols looked at their orders and could not make sense of them. The chain had done what they needed to do. Lives were safe. But the victory came with a quiet price. In the days after, small losses appeared like holes in cloth. A ferryman forgot the name of his wife for an afternoon. A teacher could not remember which day a class would meet. A woman who had spoken the river pledge in the dark could not recall the color of the ribbon she had tied on her child's coat. The trouble was small at first and then more frequent. The more vows that moved machines, the more memory thinned in those who used them most. Rafi sat with a stack of notes and a cup gone cold. He had watched charts and tests until lines blurred. He told the group what he had found. "This effect is real," he said. "When many people bind many devices, something in our minds makes room. Memory loosens, like a stitch undone." He spoke with the tired voice of a man who had watched more than he wished. Lila slammed her fist on the table. "We are saving lives," she said. "But we cannot let our children wake to a world that forgets them." Her face was hard and small and human. They tried to make a rule. Speak names before vows. Build many anchors. Carve lists into wood and hide them. Read the names each night. Make the memory stronger than the promise. These rituals helped. Families chanted names like prayers. Communities put glue on jars and hid ash where names were burned. The chain taught people how to carry proof across words and time. Still, the ministry changed too. The men in coats saw how power worked and they wanted it. They formed a group to keep order and also a group that hoped to sell a promise. They licensed vows in certain districts. They trained officials to speak safe syllables over the loudspeakers. A new market for controlled promises opened and with it came greed. A man could buy a vow to keep a building open. A company could promise a worker's safety. The chain saw their hard fight turn into a tool for money and control. The fleet stayed near the docks in that tense time as if it waited for the city to tire. Small riots broke out in places where the new laws hit hardest. People fought for food and for names. Rafi worked nights to hide anchors and to copy lists. Lila worked with artists to make songs that no algorithm could learn. Omar taught children to play memory games that were also vows. Mara moved between shelters and markets and told anyone who would listen the story of a kite and a promise. Then one night the ministry went further. They started hunting anchors. Plainclothed men pulled up floorboards and seized jars. They wiped wood with wet cloths and took names away in neat files. People were brought to stations and asked their lists. Some could say the names and keep them. Others forgot the word at the question and their hands closed around blank air. The chain scattered. Some hid in the hills. Some were taken to cells with bright lights that made voices thin. Mara watched the raids and felt something cold set in her chest. The theater steps where she had carved names were gone under police tape. A child's jar of ash was empty. In a small alley she found a note folded and dirty. The handwriting was shaky but clear. Hide the names where machines cannot read. Promise with your mouth. Keep the proof by hand. She thought of one last place, a deep cellar under the oldest bakery in the city. No official would think to search under flour sacks. She could carve a list into the underside of a beam and bind it with a vow that would live in her voice alone. To do it, she knew, she might have to give up being named in many records. She might have to step into being a blank in systems that counted people by list and batch. Her hands shook as she wrote the names on a small strip of wood. She put her mouth near the grain and spoke each name slow and bright. The words felt like embers. Her voice made the sound that would bind an anchor. When she finished, she tied the strip under the beam and wrapped it in cloth. She felt a change then, small and strange. A word slid away from her mind and she fumbled for it. She frowned and tried to pull it back. For a moment she could not tell if the missing word was a name or a recipe. The cost was already soft at the edges. Footsteps came like rain on tin. Voices shouted outside. Lantern light threw sharp shapes under the bakery door. Someone hammered on wood. Mara clutched the cloth and listened. Her heart beat fast, and the taste of flour and iron filled her mouth. Cliffhanger, she rose from the beam and wiped her hands. The door flew open. Men in plain coats filled the doorway. One of them held a tablet that glowed with a list, and at the top, where a name should have been, there was only a blank space. They came through the bakery door like a cold wind. Men in plain coats filled the room. Their faces were neat and empty. One held a glowing tablet. He read from it with the calm voice of a clerk. "Search for names," he said. The tablet showed lists. Where a name should be, there was sometimes a blank. The man looked up and smiled like a man who owns rules. "Who keeps lists here?" he asked. Mara kept her hands on the cloth that wrapped the carved strip. The flour on her fingers felt like paper. She could not move fast. The men smelled of oil and order. One of them reached for the sacks. Another stepped toward the oven. Mara thought of the boy who had fallen and the moment the drone had loosened. She thought of the theater steps and the jar of ash. She thought of Rafi's note. She felt the weight of every promise she had spoken. Lila and Omar were not far. They had hidden in the back rooms and slipped in when the men came. Lila's face was small and set. Omar held a folded map of names. Rafi was still missing. The chain had fewer helpers now, but they had anchors everywhere. The men did not know all the places. The leader of the plaincoats tapped his tablet and read more names. He smiled and said the city needed order. "People must register," he said. "We must know who speaks for whom." His words were neat and sharp. Mara stepped forward. Her voice did not shake. She told the man the truth in a small clear sentence. "We keep names safe," she said. "We protect memory so machines cannot steal it." The man on the tablet raised an eyebrow. "And who asks you to do this?" he said. Mara felt the cloth press into her palm. The carved strip was under the cloth. She had spoken every name into the wood and bound each with a promise that only she knew. The note under the beam sang the names into the grain. The wood held a small law of sound. The machines could not read wood. The state could burn records. They could not burn the names in the bones of the city. The man laughed softly. He put his hand toward her in a quiet gesture that said he would take the list and pass judgment. Mara breathed in. The promise she had carved had a cost. If she made the binding loud and public, the ministry would record her voice and trace it. If she did nothing, the lists might be found and destroyed. She had a choice: keep her name safe and risk the lists, or give the list to a voice the state could not remove. Mara reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small, old coin. It had been a child's token once. She put the coin on the table and then she did another small thing. She put her mouth near the grain of the carved wood, and she spoke the names aloud one by one. She spoke slowly, in the old tone the chain had taught. Each name was a warm thing she gave back to the city. When she finished, she did the final act planned in the deepest quiet of the bakery. She spoke a vow to hide the list from machines forever. The vow was a single line, and it was cruel and clear. "Let my name slip where lists are read," she said. "Let me be a blank in their files so these names stay for others." There was no thunder. The room did not shake. The plaincoat man watched her and tapped the tablet. A small note flickered on his screen. For a moment her own name sat there, neat and bright. Then a small white space replaced it. A blank. Her records, in the state lists, simply folded away like a memory under water. The man paused. He looked at his tablet and then at Mara with mild surprise. He did not understand the cost. He only read the result. "A glitch," he said. "We will correct it." He did not know that what he called a glitch was a choice. He did not know names carved under beams, or vows sung into wood, or the trade that women and men in the city made with memory and risk. The men left with polite bows and quiet promises to follow up. They took no jars that night. They left the bakery because the list the ministry wanted did not show her name and offered them nothing more. Lila closed the door and pulled down the shutters. Omar handed Mara a small cup of tea. They sat in a circle and let the smell of bread and late heat fill the air. Outside, people moved like soft things. The chain had lost many fights. It had won some. The fleet waited at the edge of the water, but for now it did not move. The city breathed in long slow waves. In the days after, new rules came. The ministry said they had found a strange gap in the registry. They blamed software. They asked people to re-register. Many did. Some names filled in again. Some did not. People noticed, a neighbor could no longer find a cousin in the census. A clerk could not pull a file number. Questions rose like small birds. At night the city came to the theater steps. Children pressed their palms to the carved wood. Grandmothers told stories about a baker and a boy and a promise. They read names aloud and passed a cup. Mothers taught their children to say the name of a lost uncle so the word would not leave. The chain taught memory songs in schools. The rituals spread. They were clumsy and human and they worked. Mara walked through markets and some people looked at her and smiled. Others looked at her face and could not find the little word that named her. Her sister kept a photo and could not read the caption. Friends described her in gestures and stories. Her name lived in the rhythm of a story more than in any book. One morning a boy with a kite came to the bakery. He did not know the name. He only knew the hands that had saved him. He hugged Mara and said, "Promise keeper." The words were not a formal name, but they were warm and true. Mara laughed and felt something settle in her chest. Years passed. The fleet receded. The ministry changed leaders and then changed again. Some men learned to respect the rituals. Others tried to use them. The chain kept its rules. It kept teaching how to bind memory before machine, how to hide names in wood, in jars, in songs. Sometimes Mara could not find a word she wanted. Sometimes a recipe slipped and the taste returned only when a neighbor hummed an old song. She learned to live with small missing pieces. She learned to be patient and to hold the names she loved in the mouths of others. On a warm evening, the city gathered by the river. Lanterns floated like small stars. Children called out names from a long list and 100 voices answered. The boy with the kite stood near the crowd. He did not say her formal name. He did not need to. He held her hand and whispered, "Promise keeper." Mara closed her eyes. She smiled. Around her, voices kept the city's names bright and loud, the true record that no machine could take. The white spaces in official lists did not erase what people held in their hands. They had learned that a promise can save a life. They had learned, at a cost, how to make a city that remembered.